everyone. Welcome to Project Herpetoculture podcast. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, and I'm joined as always by my intrepid co-host, Philip Leitz of Arids Only. We have an excellent show for you today, but before diving in, we have some brief housekeeping. So first, I'd like to thank Dylan and the Animals at Home Network for hosting our show. It continues to be a pleasure to be part of this platform. We'd also like to extend special gratitude to Charlie, who generously edits our audio and has done a lot to improve the quality of our show over time. And we'd also like to take a moment to tell you about our sponsors. So first, we have Custom Reptile Habitats, who have been with us since day one. They produce top-of-the-line PVC reptile enclosures, and I use them for a lot of the large format vivaria here. They're also carrying universal rocks, misking products, and a bunch of other useful stuff. So if you're in the market for any of that and you're planning to make a purchase, consider doing so through the link in our bio or description. We'll receive a small commission at no additional cost to you, and that really helps us keep the lights on over here.
Up next, we have Fairy Tale Dragons. That's the joint venture between Heather Moy and Ron St. Pierre, both of whom have achieved legendary status in herpetoculture. They've accomplished quite a lot and produced some of the finest bearded dragons and taliqua in the country, alongside a whole host of other species such as emerald tree boas and green tree pythons. Check them out if you're in the market for any of that, and be sure to follow along with them on social media. They're always up to something interesting over there.
Next, we have Cold-Blooded Caffeine, roasters of delicious coffees from all over the globe. We have a private label with them, the PH Blend, which is a light roast coffee from Rwanda. It's a great choice for those who prefer a more floral coffee with notes of berry, but they have a wide variety of options for a broad array of preferences. So check them out. And if you place an order, don't forget to use the code PROJECTHERP for 10% off.
We're also very pleased to have the support of Exoterra, a brand that needs no introduction. It's safe to say that herpetoculture wouldn't be where it is today without the influence of Exoterra. For decades, they've been industry leaders in innovation, offering just about everything needed for reptile care, from diets and supplements to enclosures, substrates, and lighting. We're both big fans of their naturalistic terraria and substrates in particular. They have a lot of interesting products in the works as we speak, and we're really looking forward to seeing what comes next.
And next we have Tamura Designs. For those in the know, Tamura Designs is widely regarded as one of the finest enclosure manufacturers on the planet. They produce outstanding large format vivaria with endless options for customization, drains, UV printed backgrounds, lighting rigs. On top of all of that, they also make amazing deli cup displays for expos and these incredible multi-unit condos, which I use here. So if you're interested in any of that and you decide to make a purchase, use the code Herpetoculture for 15% off one item as a special offer to our listeners only. We also have Happy Dragons. We're really thankful to have the support of Happy Dragons. They are producing some amazing content for bettering our reptile care. And we've been actually partnering with them to produce even more content like webinars. Also, the platform and subscription service offers breeder access to first clutches, things like that. We have online courses coming down the pipeline. In addition, we have live Q&As with reptile experts, such as Mariah Healy from Reptiles. It's truly an outstanding subscription package that also offers discounts on their supply partners, such as Ovopost and Joss's Frogs. It's really an outstanding product. So check it out. And let us know what you think.
And last but not least, if you're interested in supporting the show directly with something of a tip or a monthly donation, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/projectherpetoculture. We have a monthly live chat there with all of our paid subscribers. That's been a whole lot of fun so far. We also have a whole line of merchandise like t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and more on our website. And of course, sharing the show with a friend, subscribing on YouTube, and keeping up with social media is always very helpful.
And with all that said, we're on to the show. Thanks, everybody. All right. Project Herpetoculture Podcast. This is episode 78 with the one and only Eric Burke, the Podfather himself. Eric, how are you today, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm really glad that we're doing this. I've been looking forward to this one. It's overdue. We've been wanting to chat with you for a while, so I really appreciate you making the time to do this.
Absolutely.
And just for our listeners, Phil is on his way. He's running a little bit late, so we just got started, and he'll pop in when he gets here. But I guess just to begin, Eric, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, your kind of herpetoculture origin story, if you will, and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. I started getting into reptiles probably when I was about 5 years old. My dad was really kind of responsible for that. He was always an animal guy. I think it was maybe a couple years after. I think I had like a knoll, a garter snake, things like that I had that I kept. But I remember I went to the famous Martin's Aquarium, and I was a kid, and I'm walking through, and there was this Burmese python hatching out of an egg. That, first of all, back then, to see a Burmese python hatching out of an egg, I don't even know what it is. I'm just like, oh my God, there's a python hatching out of the egg. I think that's why I'm obsessed with pythons. Yeah. And then from there, I pretty much was just, growing up, I had everything. We had venomous stuff. We had colubrids, we had pythons and boas and lizards and turtles and crocodilians, and you name it. My dad was crazy what he kept. But probably in my 20s, I got out of keeping. I played guitar in a band and probably did that for about, 10 years. And then I guess it was about maybe 2000 I came back in, and man, was the reptile world different. It was like completely changed, and morphs were there and everything. It was just so different from what I grew up used to in the 80s. And, and then I wanted to keep a snake again. I got back into Burmese pythons, realized that was a mistake. They're too big, all that kind of stuff. And I became obsessed with pythons for a while. I wanted to keep, every species that you could get. That's how I stumbled upon the carpet pythons. And then they sort of took over. I've been in this battle for the past 20 years of wanting to keep every species of python, and then realizing that that's impossible to do with the space that I have, and then trying to, my collection would grow, and then, retract, and, it's just a back and forth constantly. To finally now, I've sort of, herping has changed me, how I keep, how I look at things, and just really bringing the collection much smaller in order to keep them better, sort of where I'm at now. But yeah, that's sort of me in a nutshell. And then NPR happened in there somewhere.
Yeah. We'll definitely get into NPR. That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's cool I love that, like that anecdote about seeing this Burmese python hatching from the egg, and that kind of planting this seed, or lighting this fire, however you want to look at it. That's amazing.
So cool.
Cool. Is there anything aside from like that moment, and the kind of like seed that it planted, in addition to that, is there anything that specifically draws you to pythons? Is it like a behavioral thing? Is it their morphology, or where they come from?
Like the head structure. Yeah, maybe a little bit of that, but it's probably like the head structure. Like when I look at colubrids, how they sort of have like no defined neck jaw area. It's just kind of like just straight. I don't know. I was just always drawn to that well-defined head, those labial pits, the peep, all that. I don't know. I think it's just weird, man. Why are some people into this group of snakes and that group of snakes? And I think for me, it just goes back to that Burmese python. At least that's what I'm chalking up to. Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, I think that like I dwell on like thinking about stuff like that. Like, why am I interested in this? Like, I mean, obviously that's part of the inception of this show is the why question, right? But
sure. Yeah.
But I think that at the end of the day, it's just like depends on what story we tell ourselves, and it's like who really knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so what does your collection consist of currently? Is it still like exclusively pythons, or do you have a little bit more diversity now? Like what's kind of going on there?
So yeah, for the most part, it's mostly all pythons. I do have a Kimberly rock monitor. I have a corn snake. I like Okatee corn snakes. I think they're cool.
Oh yeah,
um,
classic.
Me too.
there you go.
There's Phil.
Hey.
Hey, what's up, Phil?
Hey guys. Sorry
doing?
for my late. Good. Sorry for my lateness. There's some real bad traffic, and so I just decided to log in from my phone.
That's great.
So, yeah, I suspect it might take me a minute to get home, but I am here, and I will be contributing to the conversation. It's great to talk with you, and I'm sorry for the lateness again.
Yeah, no worries, man. No worries.
It happens.
Yeah, I too like Okatees. I've got a couple myself, but anyway, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know with them particularly. I just think that it's hard to beat that color and pattern of an Okatee corn snake. I mean, it's just such an iconic American species for me.
It's true.
I had to have one. I don't care about breeding them. I just have it in a naturalistic setup. Just like to check it out and watch it, So, but yeah, it's mostly pythons, mostly carpet pythons. I have. So for a while, I think I've worked with 37 species of python over my time. Currently, it's all Australian stuff, except for my Papuan carpets. Other than that, it's basically all Australian stuff. Olive pythons, rough scales, water pythons, womas, pygmies,
nice.
Western stems, Eastern stems, children's, spotted pythons, and yeah, that's pretty much it, I think.
Very cool. Some cool diversity in there, even among, just like pythons from one continent primarily. It's like you still have some pretty cool diversity in that, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So let's talk NPR a little bit. How did it start? What happened there?
All right.
What gave you the idea?
So we'll go back to like 2007 is really where the idea first started. There was a well, I don't even know if you want to call it a podcast back then, but there was a internet radio show, let's say, that was called Reptile Radio. And they primarily talked about ball pythons, but they would talk about other species as well. And there was an episode they did with Will Bird, and they talked about carpet pythons. And I was just fascinated. And at the time, the taxonomy for Morelia was scrubs were included still, bolins were still in there. So I had this idea, man, wouldn't it be cool if we could do a show that was on Morelia pythons and not so much focus on ball pythons? Because I felt that carpets and chondros specifically were very misunderstood animals. You had to have crazy humidity, which maybe you do for green trees, but for carpets, not so much. They would bite all the time. So I started thinking about it, but back then it's so easy now. Like you just log into your computer and, but back then to do like the podcast, you had to have to do it right. It was like thousands of dollars of equipment. So I kind of toyed with the idea for a couple of years. And then eventually I just decided I'm just going to do it because nobody else is doing it. So I did the first episode by myself, which is totally horrible to talk to yourself. It's no fun at all. I leave that up as a reminder. So you can still find that episode, but I leave that up so I can remind myself of how far we've come. After that, it was finding a co-host. Surprisingly, Owen lived 15 minutes away from me. Didn't know him. Wow. I saw him at a reptile show. He answered an ad I put up. And then, we started in 2011. And here we are, 13 years later, 2024. So, yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
I have a funny anecdote about this. Several years, maybe 2 or 3 years before we started this show, I love the story because I like to give Jordan Russell a hard time. But I was talking with Jordan Russell about the idea about starting a podcast. And I was like, man, I think it'd be cool to start like a like a herp related podcast or something more specific for what I'm interested in and whatever. And I was talking with Jordan about it, and I was like, hey man, what do you think about this idea? Do you think this is a bad idea, a good idea? And he was like, it's a terrible idea. He's like, dude, there's just not enough people. There's like no interest at all, you know? And I don't mean to throw him under the bus. That's not my intention at all. But like, I remember knowing about Morelia Python Radio. And I was like, well, but if there's an NPR, surely there can be a Euromastix radio. Come on. Like, what do you mean? Like there's gotta be, you know, but I listened to him. And then when we ended up finally pulling the trigger on this show, we had Jordan on, and it's just it's just funny to think about in retrospect, you know?
Yeah, you know who told me that it couldn't be done? Nick Mutton was the one that told me.
Really?
Yeah. He's like, you'll never be able to do a podcast on carpet pythons for every week. I'm like,
who do you think you are?
What a loser! No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding, Nick. You're cool.
That was the worst decision he ever made. He should have jumped on it. But yeah, no, there was a lot of people that said that you couldn't do it and you couldn't talk about it. It was such a niche topic, you know, but I don't know. It worked. So
yeah, here you are. I mean, it's 13 years. That's got to be the longest running herp show. I mean, or among them, right? I mean, I can't really think of any others.
I think we are the longest running herp podcast. Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. So, I mean, that brings a whole host of questions for me. I mean, I'm curious about like also just how it's grown into a network in like the beginning of the other shows. And when did that start? When did that kind of idea start?
5 years ago. So
yeah,
Rob Stone is sort of like, you guys know Rob. He's sort of like my
total troublemaker. Yeah.
Yeah. He's sort of the guy behind the scenes that would I remember each week, especially in the early days when we first became friends, he would kind of give me a recap of what we said wrong. What we, you know, this isn't right. This history is a little off. This is, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so I started really taking his advice. And one thing I learned from Rob is that not to speak in definitives. And we did that for a while. And it's not like I meant to speak that way, but, you know, Nick does this a lot. And I tell him it drives me crazy, but it's like, clearly everything is this way and you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I hate this. I hate it.
Yeah. I'm very allergic to that personally. Yeah.
Hanging out with Justin also, Justin Julander, going on herp trips with him. He's had an influence on me with that as well. As far as like, you know, thinking about it more so than just, you know, spitting it out. Oh, well, you know, this and this. So it must be this. It has to be this, you know, that kind of thing. But at one point we wanted to branch out. And the problem is that, as you guys know, I didn't have time to like research the snakes that I just wasn't into or didn't really have any experience with. I didn't know what questions to ask, you know, and it just seemed dumb that I would do it. So why not get other people that are more, as you know, like they look at the snakes that they keep, like I look at carpet pythons. So I think the first one to join was, I think Carpets and Coffee was probably the first branch off. And then Reptile Fight Club came in, and then we did I think after that was the colubrid one. You know, I mean, like Zach and now it used to be Matt, but now it's Clint. But like those guys, it would be dumb for me to do a colubrid show over them. You know what I mean?
Right,
so that's kind of where the network came in. So, and I knew that they wouldn't do it, but I would want to listen to that podcast. I kind of overextended when we first did it, and I didn't realize the workload that was going to come from that. So some of them have come and gone, but the core of them now are pretty much established, and colubroid, boas, reptile fight club. I'm gonna do. So here's one that's coming out. I started this one called Carpet Cliff Notes, and the idea is that I wanted to just do shorter podcast segments, like 15, 20 minutes on just a topic. But what it's evolved into, and it's going to come out at the beginning of April, is this going to be more of from a keeper's standpoint than a breeder standpoint? Because I find that, I don't know, I kind of copied it from Reptile Radio, but we kind of have that formula of, how do you keep it? How do you breed it? And kind of get into that kind of stuff. But I always felt that Morelia in particular, chondros and carpets, they miss the mark when it comes to people keeping just a pet snake, because they're beautiful. They're going to perch out in the open, and you can set up a nice display and see them. So it's kind of like engaging that part of the reptile world is what Carpet Cliff Notes is about, like taking a question that people would ask about keeping carpet pythons and sort of giving advice, if you will, So, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
So, and that's really cool to hear. I'm curious, are there things, or let me make sure I articulate this as well as I can. How has your understanding of or what expectations or assumptions have kind of either changed or been a little uprooted? Like, I'm curious about the ways that the show differs from when you first started to the way it's run now. I mean, I feel like even in the short time we've been doing this show, it doesn't even, like, the way it is now doesn't even feel like the same thing as the first few episodes. Even though it really is, at the end of the day, it's just slightly more refined. I'm just curious what that looks like from your perspective. If that makes sense. I don't know. It might not have been a very articulate.
No, 100%. I guess I would say that how it's evolved is, I think for me, having more experience with keeping the species that we're talking about leads to better discussions, I guess. Last year was a rough year for me with NPR, probably the last year and a half. I was sick all the time. My mom passed away. There was a lot going on there, and a lot of things with the family or whatever. But I made a note, so I can really say it right now. I feel like since we have been around for a long time, that we sort of needed to evolve, because I feel like there's so many reptile podcasts now, and they're kind of all doing the same thing. And it's kind of like I think you guys inspired me a lot, because you're doing it differently. You're doing it the same, but differently. You guys are going more in depth, I guess, with really, that's kind of like what I'm want to do, like really trying to understand how things work. So this year I made it a point to like really put the work into the episodes, really get more chondro content, really trying to, just up the game. But it's hard, man, when you're doing it all the time. You were talking about burnout earlier before we started. Yeah. I can really tell you a thing or two about that.
Please do.
I mean, basically, we've done it every week for 13 years.
That's amazing.
It's, how do you keep that going? How do you keep it fresh? One thing, the way I always kind of look at it is I'm really tight with Owen. I really like Owen a lot, which I think helps with, having good chemistry with your co-host. So I kind of look at it like, it's just hanging out with my friend, talking snakes, if you will.
Yeah.
To kind of give it that kind of vibe.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a lot of relatability there. I feel like some of the best shows we've done have been the ones where Roy, myself, and whoever we're speaking with are as relaxed as possible. When we're like a little tense, when we're a little bit worried about how it might go, when we feel a lot of pressure around what we should or shouldn't say or whatever, I think that's when things kind of go off the rails, you know? And I kind of feel as though I know I've said this a bunch before. It's not my intent to kind of beat the drum over and over, but like, I feel like doing the show for us anyway, it just feels like it's taught us. I feel like I don't even keep the same way as when I started doing the show. Like it's like, you know, the level of it's like you learn a pretty unbelievable amount of stuff just from talking with people. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. I think that's that's sort of what gets me through, right? You know, to be able to say that I've had conversations with Richard Shine and Gavin Bedford and, you know, I'm friends with Scott Eiper and Ty Eiper and like, I don't know, to be at a barbecue with Keith McPeak and like, I don't know, you know, they're just people, but like they just inspire you. And when you're around them, you're like, oh yeah. So like, you know, I think there was a time where I was like, I don't understand why we're not more mainstream, you know, like how do I make it more mainstream? Like kind of like in that mode of trying to, I guess, worrying about making it better. Like, what are we doing this for? If people aren't going to get the content, so am I like failing because I'm not promoting it right? Or, you know, but I found that for a while we got sucked into like drama. And I made it that's probably where the point, it was like, even how we talked about, like we would talk about ball pythons and it was like we were putting them down to raise up what we kept rather than just be happy with what we kept, try to promote that in a positive way and not have to put something down in order to put another species up. I can't stand that. I don't understand why. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, oh, they suck, man. You need to keep these. Rather than like, okay, you're keeping this, so tell me about them. And maybe you're going to be able to learn something from what they're doing, even though you don't have any intentions of keeping that species. But they're going to tell you some little thing that you wouldn't have thought of with the species you keep. And then it's like a light bulb goes off, you know? And yeah. So I mean, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no.
It is, you actually bring up a really interesting point there. You know, it's like, there is a bit of a, you know, people who keep certain animals, there is kind of like a, you know, like a better than you kind of vibe that comes along with keeping certain things, right? Like I've been there, I've done that with Euros, you know, and but it's kind of funny because in some ways, all of those major top 5 species, right? Your dragons, geckos, corn snakes, crested geckos, ball pythons. These are like, they actually kind of fit into this weird dual role of being kind of both the punching bag of our collective frustrations, but also kind of like the sacred cow of what we do in a lot of ways, right? Like, you know, because on the one hand, we love to bash them and say, oh, you know, it's a typical show, nothing but crested geckos and ball pythons, right? But then at the same time, it's like, man, those animals and the people that propagated them really like paved the way and really like they've kind of like lit a torch in a lot of ways to show us what to and what not to do, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of it's really weird. It's a really weird. They're in a really weird position. I'm kind of intrigued by that. But I also would like to pry into that a little bit further, if you don't mind. Like when you said you kind of got involved in a little bit of drama, or you got kind of caught up in drama, can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean? I mean, not necessarily asking you to rehash the drama itself, but I'm just curious.
Well, a couple of things. One, it was... You can look on any social media and you can see the drama that happens in the reptile community. And I felt that it was an easy way to get people to listen, I guess, maybe, you know, because it's simple to do and it's easy for people to, because most people want to look at the car accident as they're driving by type of deal, even though they'll say, oh my God, I can't believe that. And I kind of felt it was the same way with podcasts. And I just felt that in order, I don't know, it wasn't any particular thing. It would be like, I'm friends with this person, and I'm friends with this person, and this person and this person now have a beef. And then now they're both telling me that I can't like the other person and whatnot. And I'm like, well, I don't have a problem with either one of you. So what are you talking about? Like, I don't know. It just became more about the people drama of it rather than the animals. And as soon as I sort of like noticed that, it wasn't until I started listening to other podcasts that I sort of heard it, and I was like, oh. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, oh, do we do that? And I'm like, oh shit, we do that. No, we can't do that anymore. So, and made it a point to sort of, because I don't know, I always try to put myself into the listener's point of view. And try to, because I didn't always like carpet pythons. I had other snakes, It wasn't like I was born a carpet python enthusiast. And I thought about that. It's like, for a while I thought about getting into ball pythons, and it was like, I'm sure there's people out there when I'm starting to find them because of the way that we've sort of changed that idea of just like promote what you love. And there's going to be people in the world that love it too.
Yeah.
Just get them excited off of your enthusiasm about a species. Yeah, you're going to hear people say, they don't sell, they're dirty dirt snakes and this and that, everything else. But as long as that's what you love, who gives a shit? We get so worried about approval from other people, I guess. Like, it's like, oh, and then, I even found this with my collection. It was like, I was going and getting things, and I got sucked into that, the journey is better than at the destination type of deal, to where you'd be so excited about getting this new species. And, that is the one thing about podcasts that probably was a bad thing. It's like you would talk to somebody and they're super excited about, Moluccan scrub pythons. And you're like, oh shit, I need a Moluccan scrub python. So you're like, searching down the internet to try to find one. And then you get one. And as soon as you get it, you think, I'll be so happy once I get this. And then you're back on that train of like that, oh, now I got to get the next thing. And now I got to get the next thing. And then next thing you know, the collection was, 400 snakes at some point. And it was impossible to do NPR with that. Right. So, that was another decision I made of maybe maybe a couple years ago. It's like, I'm going to have to trim down the collection if I want to keep doing NPR, because I can't do both. And, so.
Wow.
Yeah, the whole hedonic treadmill, man. The hedonic treadmill.
Yeah.
It's like, it's such a thing. And it's not just in reptiles. It's just in anything, anything that you get that nice dopamine rush or whatever it is from a nice chemical, whatever it is, whether, I don't know if it's serotonin or oxytocin or what it is, but it's something. And man, it's like, I feel like that I've been there, and it was like almost traumatic for me, like the outcome of that, like I've talked about this before at other podcasts, but like when I was a teenager, I was in that, like I just wanted to keep getting stuff, and I got in over my head, and it got to that point where I was just panicking. So I was like, oh my God, I've got too much going on. I've got too much on my plate. And then it's just terrible. It just ruins everything. Yeah, it's super stressful. And then it's like you start to resent this thing that started out as something that brought you joy and delight. And it was like, oh God, what am I doing? So I'm like very cautious about that now. I've like tried to put guardrails up, I'm like, I've got these like arbitrary rules, like, okay, I only work with stuff from the Western Hemisphere.
Yes.
like I'm going to block out half of the planet. I'm going to block out half of the planet. I'm just not even going to look over there because Eric's killing it with the Australian pythons. I can celebrate Eric from afar and like live vicariously through him. Like Phil's got the Euros, and I'm just like, I don't need to keep it. Someone's got that,
Right.
But but also
that's such a good rule. Not to cut you off, but there's such a good rule is like not to. I have to have what that person has. It's like that's such a good thing.
But you could. It's so easy to subdivide it though. Like even for example, my stupid business is called Arids Only. You know what I mean? And it's like, under the bizarre assumption that limiting it to desert animals is somehow gonna change anything. It's like, no, it's like all of a sudden it's like, well, I could devote a little bit of space to some Pilbara rock monitors, and okay, no one's really given any attention to sandfish, and I could also, there's so many things that fit in like the temperature niche that I'm setting up here because of the Uromastics, and next thing you know, it's like I've got this balloon collection that, while at the same time I've also been trying to say, oh, I'd really like to just focus on Ornata in particular and really get Ornata as dialed in as I possibly can. And it's like, well, now I have these things that are all competing against one another. You can just subdivide and subdivide and subdivide and subdivide. It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting too. It's almost like a relationship, like a partnership where it's like, when it's like the honeymoon phase, what's new and exciting, but it's like, if you can get past that and you can get into this other stage, it's like, it's a different thing, but it's deeper, it's more gratifying, and it's more enduring, and so it's like, that's the goal, is to get like, and you're there with Euros, obviously, Phil, like you're in that stage where you're like, okay, it's a deeper kind of learning, it's this longer trajectory. Yeah. And I don't feel like I've even kept anything long enough to be in that fully yet. I'm getting there with, sulfurious and a couple other things, but
sure.
I don't know. It's like, it's harder to talk about that in a way that's like, that stirs that excitement and that fervor in people, that it makes them want stuff. It's like, you can really, it's like, how do you articulate this, like this longer arc kind of thing?
Yeah.
Well, I think in some ways, it's I think that's a great analogy, because like when you first start out with an animal, there's definitely like that initial, it's just like when you go on dates with somebody, or you're in the dating market, right? You go on dates and you have some of those awkward sushi dates where like nobody's saying anything and you're like, I don't even know if this is going to go anywhere. And then like next thing you know, you walk by an arcade and you go, you want to go play some Pac-Man? And it's like, hell yeah. Like, oh, sick. Maybe I'm really, maybe I'm really going to get along with you. Right. Yeah. And then all the joyful stuff happens where the animals thrive and everybody's happy and looking really, really good. And, you get some of your early success with breeding, and you get eggs and you get babies. But then when you start, you dilate the time scale and things get really squirrely because, things get really squirrely because good. Sorry about that. Now all of a sudden you're having to you're almost back to the negative and the uncertain in some ways, the longer you go in, because you're like, man, I didn't recognize that this tail whorl curling issue was going to come up. And it's like all of a sudden these unanticipated issues that you wouldn't have known if you didn't spend the decade and a half to get to that point in the first place. It just wouldn't even have presented itself to you. And so then now you're back in this phase of where it's like, you're not in the honeymoon phase and you're still seeing a lot of success, but you're also encountering all these smaller problems or more nuanced issues that now it's like, now you got to go to therapy, right? Now you got to go to couples therapy and you got to talk about she never really puts the dishes away and it drives me kind of nuts, and you have to kind of address that. So, it's a lot like finance or investing, right? In a lot of ways, in the same way that it's like a relationship. Sometimes the biggest payouts don't happen until 30 years deep, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. It's even as a matter of, just as a side note real quick, one of the things that made me be able to pivot with reducing the collection, because it's something I struggle with for a long time. Like, if I get rid of this, nobody's going to have it, and who's going to do it, blah, 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 all these things that go through your head. Am I doing a disservice to the reptile community by not preserving this bloodline or this, special animal or, whatever. But Owen it's funny, right? We started out like this, and then as we changed sides, and now he's breeding, he's like breeding Madagascar hognose, white lips, rough scale, all these crazy speed. Like, his collection is just insanity, but it makes him happy. But it's a good dynamic because now we've changed perspectives. And we've done that as through growing the show with each other. So it's sort of interesting how that dynamic has changed because, he was saying, you're not going to breed this year. And I'm like, no. And that was a hard thing to do, right? Because there's such this, at least in the circles that I'm in, there's such a, if you're not breeding, you're not anybody. You're nobody.
What are you doing, man?
Well, like, what's wrong with you? Yeah. It doesn't, it's kind of like, I look at it like playing guitar, right? 90% of the time you're playing rhythm, but you focus on this 10% of the time where you're playing lead guitar because it's the fancy licks and the chops that you're showing off and everything. But really the nuts and bolts of everything is the rhythm. And, to me, the keeping part is sort of the rhythm part. Understanding like, okay, why did it do that? Why is it doing this? Should we give it UV? Should we not give it UV? Should we give it, does it need a basking spot? Is writing in heat panels? Like all these questions that, I guess come up that most people that are breeding are focused on the breeding side of it, that I feel that they kind of look like, well, it's doing okay. So, it must be okay.
Yeah. That's actually a great analogy. It's so funny how sometimes some of like the least sexy stuff is kind of what really keeps the gears greased, right? I mean, it's like, I feel like in the same way that 90% of playing guitar is rhythm. Yeah. I feel like 90% of keeping reptiles picking up shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I'm mostly just working toilet duty, man. Like that is such an irrational percentage of the time I spent doing this.
Right.
But it's really like that's the kind of the foundation upon what all of the rest of this is built on. I mean, that's kind of what makes those poignant moments when you see something pip an egg or see something you've never seen before, or something weird pops out, or some of that really cool sweet stuff. That's when it's like, oh man, that really, I'm glad I picked up this thing shit for the last 6 years, Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. It's sort of like doing all that work to get to that one day where you see it. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, it kind of pipped out. I guess like, I don't accept, oh, this slugged out. Oh yeah, it's probably, who knows? Nobody knows the real reason why I did it. Why does this carpet python get cancer? Why does, why does this happen? And you're sort of just like, well, that's just part of them. Well, are we doing something wrong? Is there something wrong somewhere and how we're keeping them? Are they lacking something? Or, I don't know. You could go down that rabbit hole forever. But I don't know. It's just an interesting thing that I kind of got used to not breeding, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say a little more? I'm sorry, Roy. Go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to comment on that. I feel like some of my favorite people to listen to in herpetoculture are not people that are focused on breeding at all, but they're really interested in just like providing a high standard for their animals, and they're interested in like the behavior that they can get from that.
Yes.
And like that's an equally valid and valuable contribution to the field of herpetoculture, in my opinion, as breeding stuff, and I don't know. I think that there's something in all of this too that's like that speaks to that. I mean, you spoke to music, and like Phil's spoken about this in terms of like art and like martial arts, combat sports. But I feel like it's, for me, I relate to like my writing work, and there's just something about like how it's just craft, that like at a certain stage in craft, it's like, I think about like the quote from Chuck Close, who's the incredible painter, who said like, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just get up and go to work, and it's like, I think it's kind of it's a very similar thing in herpetoculture where it's like, it's the inspiration, again, like the excitement of the new thing is it serves a function. There's utility in it. But like, it's kind of like almost an adolescent thing to focus on in perpetuity, Like there's a different kind of depth that's possible, I think, by just, falling in love with the grind.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think that's dead on. And something that you just said, Eric, just a second ago was I found pretty intriguing, because it's like with the whole breeding topic, right? It's like, well, in some ways it seems as though breeding is the end. That's the end that people are seeking, right? It's like, well, sure. I want to get all the parameters right, and I want to get the diet right, and I want to get all this stuff right, because then they'll breed, or then the breeding will be better, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, I kind of would be more interested in a herpetoculture that sees breeding more as like a background thing, more as like seeing it in the same way that we see providing an optimal diet or providing great houses, otherwise great husbandry, because it's like, well, really at the end is to make sure that we can keep doing this, and that other people in the future can keep doing this. But it's not. So you almost kind of want to like invert. You almost want to invert the priority meter there in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's kind of like sort of my thinking. I guess for me, with the breeding thing of like why going to Australia and seeing wild carpet pythons changed me. In a very profound way. I was okay with keeping them. I was keeping them good. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't like I was neglecting, but I use perching as an example. For the longest time, I would keep, carpets in cages like this, and they would have a shelf, and the carpets would never go up on the shelf. So I immediately, again, talking about definitives, I immediately would say, well, carpet pythons don't perch, so I don't need to give it a tall cage. Even though every book I've read says they're semi-arboreal, every picture I see, they're in trees, and that's kind of what their thing is. And when I went to Australia and I saw them in the wild, my ideas of humidity and temperature and, what they're doing and size of just an adult, what an adult looks like, as opposed to like what we're used to seeing, where these obese snakes fed every Friday, is like, and like, I don't know, it really just changed the way I look at keeping it. And I came back and I was like, no, I'm doing this wrong. I have to do this differently, because they're okay, but they're not. I found out about myself that I'm more into the observation of the animal and learning. I heard Vin Russo say this one time on a podcast a long time ago. And it's like, he's not worried about the paint job of the car, but he's worried about how the insides make the car go. And that's sort of like, I think maybe for us that are so involved in herpetoculture that we sometimes forget about how fascinating these animals are. And we take for granted the things that they do, that it's like seeing a python shoot up a tree as it's like doing that rap thing. And it's like, it has no legs, no limbs, and it's just climbing a tree. And you're just like staring at this thing like, oh my God, that's amazing. Or like when you see pictures of I'm going to say carpet python, but it could be anything, just like holding a prey, hanging out of a tree, and they're just eating it. Like hanging there. It's just, I don't know, like stuff like that. And I guess the one thing that I noticed as I switched to keeping more naturalistic is that what I used to think was a boring animal per se, like they didn't really do anything. Oh, they're ambush, and we would defend that by saying things like, oh, they're ambush predators and all this stuff, and they don't really move around all that much. And then as soon as you offer things to them, you start to see, oh, well, talking about perching, I just had it all wrong. Perching, it's more like a tree boa type of perch than a chondro, where they have multiple points where they're going to rest their coils, as opposed to the drape that chondros do, So, things like that. And the temperature thing, we went there and it's 70 degrees. And, that's what I would drop my breeders to breed, thinking, oh, this is too cold. So the whole idea of just temperature just, completely changed. Now, mind you, when you're herping, you're seeing this little snapshot of time, so you got to take that into consideration. But I don't know, it just changed me. And, I struggled with, should I even keep these? Like that kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
Go through, what I mean? I don't know. It was just a really great thing to have happen because it changed the way I look at keeping snakes.
Yeah. There's so much to that. It's like the old thing of when you're a little kid and you're like, oh, you're telling your parents like, I'm bored. And they're like, oh, only boring people get bored.
Right.
It's like, oh, it's like my animals are boring because they're bored. Maybe, it's like,
right.
Wait a second, it's like, if you give them things to do, they'll do things, it's right. Like, oh, wait, that makes sense, but it totally is one of those things where it's like, yeah, unless you have, I don't know. It's like you come into herpetoculture and you like immediately inherit like these certain perspectives and like ideologies and,
sure.
and values, right? And like sometimes, yeah, you experience something like you did. You get out in the field and you see it in the field and it just like turns everything on its head. And it's like, oh, wait a second, there's a whole other way to do this thing. There's a lot of ways to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I mean, even the logic you mentioned earlier, like, oh, I have a perch in the cage and the python doesn't use it, therefore they don't perch. It's like, well, that's like looking at a hairless rat and saying rats don't have hair.
Yeah.
It's like, you crazy, dude? Like,
right.
It's not even close. It's not even remotely close. It's a peculiar thing. So guys, I'm gonna log off real quick and then get on my computer because I'm home now. But just give me a second.
Okay. Thanks, Phil. Bye. Yeah, I mean, it's so cool to hear about that perspective change, and that's something that I haven't had like the opportunity to actually encounter any of the species or many of the species I work with, actually in the field. But I do a lot of field herping, but for of course my local native stuff, and that was a big part of like that time away from herpetoculture where I was gone for 10 years. It was like mostly field experience is what I was exploring, and not just with herps, but just broader ecology stuff. And
sure,
that's been like a huge perspective change for me too, since I got back into it. Is like, okay, it's how can I try to encourage like the broadest range of like, natural behavior that I can in these animals, because that's part of what that's part of what motivates me as a keeper is seeing stuff like that. It's like, that's what gets me excited. It's like, if I see a new behavior, it's like, I mean, there's a few times where I've like literally been there with like, a tear in my eye, watching my snakes do something I've never seen before.
Yeah.
And I've talked about it, like seeing the Spilotes drink out of the bromeliads. And I put them in there the first time, I was like, holy shit.
That's so cool.
Yeah. It was like, this is amazing, and the first time I put in halogen lights instead of a heat panel, and like they all came out and immediately started basking under this halogen. I was like, oh my God, what the hell have I been doing?
Yes.
There's like that mixture of like guilt of like, how can I deprive them of this, before when I thought I was doing so well, but it's also like so rewarding. It's such a cool thing.
Yeah. And I think that's just, maybe that's just a natural evolution. Me and Rob have talked about this a lot, to where he's keeping way less than he's ever kept. And he just did all these naturalistic builds for his rhinos and stuff. And like, he's sort of like, we've sort of embraced the idea that, we love herping, and that's cool. But it's also, I also like keeping. So I want to have, something there that I can observe when I'm not able to get to, say, Australia or something like that. But
right.
Yeah, I don't know. I also don't like to, I don't like to, again, it goes back to this knocking something down to build something up.
Yeah.
I don't really care how other people keep their stuff. I can only tell you how I do it, and I can tell you what's changed me and why it's changed me, and you can take that information and do with it as you will. I'm not judging you. I'm not, I don't want to get into that because again, it's like you get into these debates and it's like, oh, you're keeping this wrong and this is da 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 da. I don't know. I feel like when we talked to Richard Ross, the guy that wrote the Python and Boa reproduction Bible, like I felt like those guys in the earlier days did their due diligence to get these to breed and be able to be kept in captivity. And I feel like my generation and maybe a little younger have not really taken it to that next level. I think it's starting to go that way, but like have a better understanding of the animals and how they work rather than just going like sort of what you said. You sort of get into herpetoculture and you sort of have these, this is taught, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do. And you just sort of do it and you never think about changing it. You're just sort of like, oh, okay, it's work, and it works. But I want more. I want to learn more. I want to know more about it, and that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I feel really similarly about that. I hope I don't come across as arrogant or like this is the only way to do things or this is the right way to do things. And I'm sure inevitabely people will interpret that way, regardless of where I'm coming from or not. But like I totally agree. I mean, there's different. Like in part, again, why we ask the question we do at the end of every show is like, why herpetoculture? It's like, because there are different reasons why people do it, and I think that's okay as long as we're aware of the reasons why we're doing it and what actually motivates us as keepers. And I think that like asking ourselves that question, like what's actually motivating as a keeper is a really helpful thing to know about yourself because it can help you avoid things like burnout, because it's like, it's easy to, again, jump on the hedonic treadmill and then you get too many snakes and you're a mile wide and you're an inch deep with all of them. And it's not fulfilling for you because what you actually want is to be a mile deep and an inch wide with what you're keeping. You know what I mean? And it's different for different people, but like knowing where you are on that spectrum is really helpful. And also it can change and will change.
Oh yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. I find that if you get books, right, that's the you can hit that dopamine hit.
It's so true.
And you don't have to take care of it. You don't have to feed it. You just have to read it every once in a while.
I'm like, okay, what are the books and what are the plants that I can put in the vivaria? It's like, is there a new plant out there? It's like, I need a little something. I'm feeling a little down here.
Yep, 100%.
Yep.
I'm curious too. I mean, you mentioned this is something I think about a lot where, the whole like who are those younger folks and what is that next leap, what that next step forward? Like what is the next the next innovation? What does that stuff look like? And I kind of wonder about that because, in some ways I wonder if you can even, I'd be curious to know what you think some of those next steps might be. Like not necessarily, and I don't mean like identify the next steps so somebody can take them. I'm just right. I'm just curious, like if you had to speculate, maybe a better way to ask this is like, what do you think in, let's say 50 years, maybe 50 to 100 years in that ballpark.
Sure.
What do you think we're doing now that we might look back on that people might go, Jesus Christ, like I've heard this about other industries. Right. And one of them is I've heard people in various medical circles say things like, we're going to look back at orthodontics and think, good Christ, we had this out of hand, right?
Right.
Because there's probably better ways, like more simple solutions to some of those issues, instead of like putting metal in people's mouth and pulling their face apart, right?
Right.
And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to
my parents paid a lot of money for that, Phil.
Same, dude. My wife worked at an orthodontic office. I get it. I'm not bashing the field. I just In the same way, I'm not bashing like using leeches to like, you know. Yeah. No, I'm curious though, if Eric, if you have any thoughts on like what
I think,
you know.
Probably the two that pop into my head right away, and I think some of this is actually getting worked through now. Would be lighting, heating. Would be one that I would think. The idea that you just keep something in a drawer that doesn't need light or anything like that. I mean, I don't know. I was listening to somebody talk. I can't remember who it was, and they were talking about, and I'm not going to be able to really say this 100% accurately because I'm just saying off the top of my head, but snakes, pythons would release certain hormones like we do when we're going to go to sleep, but it's sort of the opposite. So if you're keeping them in like it's just light all the time, are they getting that hormone release, and is it affecting them in any type of way? Maybe it's not. I don't know, but it just seems odd to me. Like take diamond pythons. They're made to bask. Like that's what they do. Their whole phenotype is based off of them being in a cold environment that basks. I think the other thing would be diet. Similar to what you were saying earlier about, at least with pythons, it's like it's a go-to that it's automatically just feed it a rat, feed it a mouse type of thing. And like, I know Owen's experimented with this a lot with varied diet with various species that he keeps and stuff, but like saying like, oh yeah, we could feed it a bird. Maybe it's good that it feeds a bird once in a while. Or like even knowing where you're getting your rodents from or your feed from and like understanding what's involved in that. And maybe some people do that at this point, but the circles that I'm in, they're just like, these rats cost $1, know, like, yeah, but they look horrible, man.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just fascinated. I know, Rob has said this on your show, is the cosmic octopus. Like you're never going to understand how everything is tied together, but it sure is fascinating trying to figure it out. But
there's this like, basically this like song lyric. It's like a, Magnolia Electric Company. And it's like, you're never going to figure it out. But like the real truth about it is everyone has to try, that's part of it. Yeah. It's like, you just got to keep doing it and figuring it out. And you're never actually going to arrive, but it's like the striving that matters, on some level.
Sure. Right. I don't know. You tell me this. Like I was listening, you're a plant guy. I was listening to this person and they were talking about how plants respond well to classical music. Right?
Yeah.
Right. And they say that they starting to think that the reason that the birds come out in the morning time and sing their songs is because it's sort of related to that same idea. And it does something to the plants. And like, I guess it's things like that. Are we missing something that's making them more complete, if you will?
Yeah,
for sure. And we absolutely are. I mean, we must, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're missing things for ourselves to make ourselves more complete.
Yes.
Which is probably why we are obsessed with this whole thing so much. It's like, it's such a real thing. I mean, even down to, you bring up bird song. It's like, I remember hearing at one point, like people were studying, like, what is like the human ear? Like, what is like our like auditory system, ideally tuned for? And like the expectation was like, it's going to be to other human voices because language is so important in like human evolution, right? Hominid evolution. Right. And what they actually found is that like the decibel range or whatever perfectly matched bird song, not human voices.
Really?
Because in like hominid evolution, like you want it to be in areas with biodiversity, and bird song is like a really strong indication of like biodiversity in a place. If there's a lot of bird song, there's a lot of abundance there.
Right.
And birds are a really strong indicator of that, which is just like, the first time I heard of that, I was like, oh shit.
Yeah, you're just like boom.
Yeah, it's like, oh wait, that's why I feel like that when I'm in like it's a nice spring day and the birds are singing and I'm just like blissed out. It's like, oh, that's an old thing in me, Right. It's so cool.
I think the other thing is stress. This sort of came to me when we went to Australia in 2019. We were talking with Gavin Bedford. He was talking about Oenpelli pythons, and he said it on our show. We had him on, but he was talking about how a snake was stressed for 2 months. Like it was him interacting with this snake. I can't remember. They were holding it, and it was longer than it should have been. And like the animals were real secretive to begin with. So somebody went into his room and they were sort of handling the animals to show them, and it set them back 2-3 months.
Yep.
Because they were just done. And understanding that, to me, I don't know, maybe that's sort of a known thing, but to me that was like 2-3 months. What? Like what? It just resets the clock. Like, holy shit, that's crazy.
Yeah, I experienced that once with an Amazon puffing snake with the spilotes that I had. That I had to sex it to confirm it. You know, that I thought it was a male, but I was like, I gotta probe this thing to confirm that.
Right.
And this is a 10-foot snake, and so I like needed to like 2 people to probe it. You know, one person holding the front end. You know, and then one person probing, and snake was not pleased about it, and like my relationship to that snake completely changed because of that one event. Like the snake was super inquisitive and like had no fear of me before that. And it did not eat for a month after that and did not want anything to do with me after that. And I was like, oh God, like that was a traumatic event for this snake. I wish there was a better way to do this. That was before rare genetics existed and you could just send in a shed. But like now it's like, I'm really cautious about that kind of stuff because it's like, it's like, okay, I'd rather just pay $20, you know, and send in a shed than stress this thing out and like ruin my relationship with it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's definitely, man, you know, speaking of that, the whole, you know, like the plants and music and the bird song and people. And I read about this study that this person did. She, I don't remember her name. I wish I could. I heard her on a podcast. I think it was on a Radio Lab. She was talking about how they would put plants in a dark room. So how do you know, the premise was like, how could you construct like Pavlovian response in a plant somehow, or like operant conditioning in a plant? Because if light is food, how would you reward or indicate that they're about to get food if they just need, you know, if they're like out? So anyway, they put plants in a dark room and they had a light kind of like on one side that would hit the plant at an angle. And what they would do is they would turn on a fan before the light, like 10, 20 seconds before the light would turn on, the fan would click on. So it's like, you know, there'd be wind. And what they found was that when they would, after not very long, after they clicked on the fan, the plant would react and start to tilt and turn all its leaves towards where the light was going to come from. Which is like, what? Like, what? Like, because that suggests like a kind of memory, you know what I mean? Like, which is like, where would that even be stored? How would that happen? Like, what would that look like? Because, you know, plants are something that I think people kind of have a tendency to think we kind of get them to a certain degree, you know, if we've been studying plants for so long. And you know, I mean, speaking of things that we don't really fully understand, or like, you know, horror physics, it's actually a little creepy, you know, just a little. It's like, Jesus Christ. Like, I've been really thinking about this entirely incorrectly, you know? Yeah.
It's like, they're the kind of like, oh man, when we do a podcast and some little tiny nugget of information like that comes out, that's it. That's it. You know, it's like, and every once in a while you get that. I don't know if you guys experienced that, and you're just like, totally changes the way you think about it from this other guest that's coming on and saying, hey, what about thinking about it this way? You're like, what?
I love that. I live for that. That's what it's all about.
Even what you were talking about before, like the way that going field herping, you know, when you saw carpet pythons in the wild, I mean, it's like, in some ways, the distance makes a big difference. It's like I can go out and find chuckwallas in 10 hours. I can drive 10 hours and go find chucks,
Sure.
But it's kind of the same thing. It's like, it's no different than like going to find a carpet python. It just takes me a fuck ton longer to get to Australia, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just going to take a lot longer. So it's possible that the extension of the journey, the distance makes the heart grow fonder kind of thing. Like, if I go see a parenti, I might brick because it's a parenti.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to
brick. You will brick.
Yeah. But someone in Australia or someone in South Asia who's obsessed might come to the United States and see a Gila monster and they would shit their pants. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's such a weird thing that you want to have. I think it just goes back to that you want what you can't have, I guess, or like it's like I talk about it all the time with people about, there's like garter snakes all over my backyard, right? And somebody from Australia would be like losing their shit about seeing garter snakes, and it's like they're in my yard, and I'm just like, oh yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
There's something about when you're so used to only seeing a python in a cage or a deli cup that you see it on the road and you're like, oh shit, this is like a wild snake. Like, holy shit, this is a python. It's just like, oh my God. Yeah.
Right.
That's kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, it's true. Yeah, there's something about that weird rarity, something about the infrequency of something really makes you not take it for granted, or you take it less for granted,
Yeah.
But there really is something also about the seeing stuff out in the world, like I think all the time about when I go find a chuckwalla or, when I can finally go see Euros in the wild, I look at all of it, right? Like, that's a perfectly formed animal for what it is. Like, even if it has like a missing leg or a missing foot or a scar or whatever,
right?
Everything else about that animal is exactly as it ought to be.
Right.
There's no scale deformation. There's no bulgy eyes. There's no overgrown toenails. There's no swelling. Right. There's no obesity. They're perfect. They are absolutely perfect. And it in such a way, and you're like, God, could I ever recreate this indoors? And, I kind of tend to think you probably you can get close, like you can probably do something very similar, but my God, it's definitely one of those, it's very humbling. It makes you go, whoa, like I'm not, like, as you said, when you came back from that, you're like, you came home and you're like, I'm doing everything wrong. I feel that way every single time I go field herping. Every single time I see anything that resembles the stuff I keep inside, I'm like, I'm doing this so wrong, and who's the Mike? I'm forgetting his last name. We just Slimy Salamander. Yeah, right. He has these brilliant photos that he'll take of like salamander habitat, and he'll frame it in a way, and you'll be like, he's like, God, would love to recreate this inside, and it's like, man, that is what that's the goal. You feel like you want to just transplant. Like, if I could just somehow transplant. And I kind of go back and forth all the time on this, because on the one hand, I feel like that's definitely the goal, and that's kind of like the North Star, for lack of a better term. But I also kind of acknowledge that, like, in some ways also we're definitely doing something different too, like, and in some ways I've made this analogy before, but I feel like there were people like us, a little different, who were having conversations like this about corn, or like, you know what I mean? This one yellow corn's got some fat ass kernels, dude. That's really weird. Why can't we get it to look like this purple corn in the field? What the fuck? So I don't know. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an either and kind of thing,
Yeah, I think it's very hard to recreate nature in a box, because there's just so many facets that you don't understand. And I do think that, especially if you're doing like any kind of breeding operation, I think you want to replicate those things that I should back up. When I'm saying that, like, I'm specifically talking about snakes, because I think that there are facets of the reptile world that do, like the dart frog community. They have it nailed down, and
Right. Yeah. Beautiful.
as much as I don't keep dart frogs, again, I can look at what they're doing and try to apply that concept to what I'm doing. And I think for me, that's where I like pushing myself outside of that box. When I started keeping monitors, I realized they were the same thing. Like, they had these things so much different than snakes. But I think like snakes are just like, there's no way to visually sort of see, I guess, the same way as you can see from something with legs, as whether or not they're, I don't know if that's right or not, but I just feel like, am I right? Would you agree with that?
Right.
Like,
totally right. It's like there's less indicators for you to pay attention to.
Yeah. So you just say, oh, they're okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's where the snake world is sort of what I'm saying is like, I think that there are people that are gearing towards that way. I think of Lucas Lee that's on Carpets and Coffee. I love that kid. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm old enough to be his dad, but I'm like, as soon as I started talking to him, I was like, oh yeah, that's the future. This is the guy, that type of thing. So, yeah, I don't know. It sure is fun to think about though.
Yeah. And it also seems like a lot of places, a lot of like industries are kind of going through a similar, or appear to be going through similar reckonings, right? Like,
right.
The sort of like in the wake of the sort of ubiquitous understanding of how horrific factory farming is, there's like a desire to go to like more organic, free range.
Sure.
What's the regenerative agriculture movement kind of thing? And
Sure.
I think that's really cool. You know, I think there's a lot of people who are kind of recognizing like our desire. Man, my cat, you see my cat up here?
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah.
She's a little shithead, dude. She's over there trying to get one of three. But, there's it's really fun to see more and more animal related institutions recognizing that they can't do it in a vacuum, you know, like we really have to do it in a way that is in conjunction with the world around us rather than sort of in opposition to the world around us, and I feel like, regardless of whatever your goals are, like I feel like that has a wide net. It can really catch a lot of people. I definitely think, earlier on in the show, you were talking about the ways in which you engage with various kinds of drama, and it made me think about the ways in which Roy and I have talked about being sort of allergic to certain kinds of certainty. And we've made a really intentional choice to not make statements, like really trying not to like make proclamations about what shouldn't be, what's right and wrong. Like, I mean, obviously we make some,
sure. Yeah.
Because some of them seem really self-evident and uncontroversial.
Right.
But, actually I kind of forgot where I was going with this. Well, shit. I forgot.
I think too, not to maybe why you think about it for a sec, but I think that, one thing I learned real quick from doing NPR is like how I keep here in Pennsylvania is probably completely different than how somebody keeps in West Texas or California or Colorado or whatever. Me and Rob had a talk about, there was a Diamond Python article that came out maybe the 90s by this guy, Stan Shearis. And it was like this controversial article because he got them to breed, but he kept them in his garage in a styrofoam cooler and whatnot. And, when me and Rob were talking, well, Rob's from Colorado. So he's saying, well, you don't understand, man. It snows at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And then by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's clear again, and it's just like, so like it's not the same, he has like 2% humidity. When he comes out here on the East Coast, it's like 70% humidity, and he's
Right.
just it's just completely different. And like, I know that like you hear people say, oh, I don't drop temps, and then your room naturally drops the temps.
Yeah.
You don't even know
Yeah.
you're doing it. You don't even know it is happening. So how many other things happen within your house? Just the type of windows you have, or
Right.
the door you have, or do you have a window? Do you not have a window? You know, all of these things that we sort of like don't even think about when it comes to the room that we're keeping the reptiles in, that could impact.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
God, yes. Oh,
Yeah,
So you
it's
can't
a classic thing.
And you also can't say that just because you're having success on the West Coast, and I'm saying, well, this is how you keep it on the East Coast. Well, should you adopt my way of keeping and then you have no success? That, you know, I don't know. It's, to me, it just comes back to that understanding the fundamental natural history of the animal that you're keeping, and sort of understanding that. So when a problem arises, you can sort of say, okay, let me try to figure out what's going on here and how can I fix it, rather than say, okay, well, the care sheet said I should keep, you know?
yes. God, yeah. Oh man, and yeah, there's a lot there.
I feel like, again, that's something we talk about a lot too. But just again, it's like, I think that herpetoculture at its best is just it's not a prescriptive thing. It has to be like, it has to be attentive to where you are and your specific conditions, and
Sure.
and trying to bridge to whatever, you know, the animal's native conditions are as well as you can from that place.
Yeah.
And it's imperfect at best, because again, it's like there's certain things you just can't replicate. It's like, good luck trying to replicate barometric pressure changes and stuff like that. And you know, it's like, you can't just do that on demand in the way that you want to in most circumstances. So yeah,
100%.
But then you get the cosmic octopus again, right? You know, it's like,
Yeah.
we're back there.
Yeah.
Well, one thing, I mean, you spoke to it a little bit already, but I kind of want to circle back to it. But just like this whole conversation around burnout, like I'm curious. I mean, like both as as a podcaster, you know, and a podcast host for this long running show, this enduring show, but also as a keeper, you know, what are the ways in which you've kind of like learned to move with that, you know, to deal with that as you've grown as a person over the years?
I guess with the podcast, I found myself burning out when I wasn't talking about the things that I wanted to talk about. Like I felt that I had to deliver something, again, going back to, I don't know, I guess it's ego. I don't know what it is, but like you have to be the number one podcast, or, you know, this whole idea of that kind of thing, and like what you're doing to do it. I don't know, that really led me down a path that I wasn't excited to do it. So focusing on what I am passionate about helps a lot. Helped me a lot. Because if you're talking about things that you're not passionate about, I don't know, just it gets old quick, you know. When Tuesday rolls around and it's time to record, you're like, oh man, I got to do this again.
Right.
And, you know, having Owen there as a support, because we've been through that. Luckily, we've never been through it together, but we've been going through it separately. And, you know, talking to Owen about overextending myself in the collection, and this is too much and I can't handle it. And, you know, what did I do? And I can't believe I did this. And, you know, when they're in the rack, in the baby rack, everything is good, but then they start growing, and now the feed bill, and, you know, it's just, but yeah, I don't know. The one thing I do now, herping, I call it resetting my soul. Regardless of where it is, it's just getting out. I don't even care if I see anything. It's just getting out into nature, just sort of resets that, you know. I come back fresh from that. Some experience that happened on that trip. And part of my other favorite part of the trips is the conversations that happen afterwards at the end of the night around the campfire, or when you're having a beer or whatever the case would be. You just have conversations with people, especially when you're with people that you're tight with. It's just awesome, It's like, because there's nobody listening, nobody's going to judge you, so you can sort of like let your thoughts fly. And if you say something dumb, you're not going to be like, that guy's an idiot. You're not going to have that kind of thought. But yeah, I guess that's it. As far as the animal park goes, I was just trying to find, like I said, getting books instead of snakes really helped out a lot. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just having a good support. My wife, she's been awesome through all this, to be every Tuesday, and then at some point it just becomes part of who you are, I guess. You know what I mean?
It's just
I can't see myself not doing it. It's sort of similar to like keeping reptiles. I'm sure that my keeping will evolve. Maybe at one point I'll only have 2 snakes or something like that, or one big, huge display of a species that I really like or something like that as I get older. I don't know, but being okay with that evolution. I've really struggled with that for a while, because again, it goes back to what I was taught when I was coming into herpetoculture is you have to have a huge collection. You have to have all the morphs. You have to have all the localities. You have to have everything, or you're going to be a nobody, because you're going to have to stand out from everybody else. And why would anybody buy a snake from you if you don't have the best stuff, and blah, 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 blah. And I don't know. That's, to me, I don't know. I guess the customer side of things burnt me out with selling snakes. Not because not because of anything other than my day job is running a supermarket. So I'm dealing with the public all day, and then to deal with public later on when situations don't necessarily go right. I've never had any problems with anybody, but it's just the whole idea of it. I don't know.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question, but
oh, it was great. I appreciate you. I appreciate you circling back to it, and it does answer the question. And it's also like affirming in some ways. I think that like making sure that like you, like as a host of a show, like you have to be invested in the conversations you're having. If you're bored in the conversation, or you feel like you're going through a formula, it's like it's done. You're cooked.
100%.
I feel like I'm already learning that, with this show, and so it feels good to hear that from someone who's like at a very different stage in the journey.
I kind of felt there were times where I felt like maybe we shouldn't do it once a week, because maybe I'm not able to do enough research on the topic, and we're just sort of putting it out to put it out.
Yeah.
There was a stage there where we were doing that. And, say out of the 50 shows that we would do a year, let's say 20 of them were like that, then it's like, oh, what are we doing? It's like you have to sort of rethink and sort of retool it. And, me and Owen, we like to meet once a quarter and sort of talk about where we want to go and what we want to do and where do we see it going and all that. And somehow we keep going. So,
well,
it's working.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that's a great point to ask. Maybe, I mean, I want to be respectful of like everybody's time. This is 90 minutes now. I think we're doing a great. Wow. This is good shit. And I'm not at all interested in stopping the conversation, just to be clear. But I think that what you just said is actually a great question. What does the future look like for you? Like, what do you guys see? What's the next thing? Like, what are some goals that you guys have for the future of NPR and kind of your future for you personally? Like, what does all that look like for you?
For me, one of the things I would love to do is, and I've been working on this since 2018, is that the book Adventures in Green Tree Python Country sort of inspired me to do something similar with it's the working title is like Adventures in Carpet Python Country, but obviously that'll change. But that idea of sort of tying in those things that we talk about in the hobby, taxonomy, what the localities look like. It's funny, like I think that Americans have no idea what carpet pythons look in the wild. And there's like this disconnect between how Australians see carpet pythons and how Americans see carpet pythons. When we see a coastal carpet that's in the States, we're like, oh, this is what a coastal looks like. No, that's not what a coastal looks like. And it's, I don't know, things like that. So that's one thing that we're working on. I don't know. I just want to keep, one of the big things is trying to incorporate I don't want to say pet keep, like I guess it would be pet keep, like the keeper side of things more. So like trying to delve into that a little bit more. I like the idea of our Patreon because I feel that one of the things I love about it is we have like a Discord and like it's sort of a old forum type of feel for me rather than the Facebook type of thing. And I like, or the Instagram thing. I find that if I'm looking on there, I get distracted easily. So if I'm just focused in on this group of people that they're like your core group of fans, like I feel like, I think this is one thing that we talked about. We're always trying to get more people to listen. So it's like you're trying to get the people that don't listen to you to listen to you, while you're not necessarily focusing on the people that do. So paying more attention to the people that do. If it's 100 people, but they're as passionate about the topic as we are, and that's beautiful. I don't care that it's just 100 people, but there's just something about that positivity, I guess, if like that. It's just a whole sense of community. We did that with Carpet Fest and stuff like that. Like, early on, we sort of felt that you spend too much time behind a computer and not enough time talking face to face. It's a different conversation when you're talking face to face. Really trying to get that community sense going. So that's another thing we're working on Carpet Fest for this year. I don't really see adding anything, I suppose. Just trying to keep going with what we're going with and maybe try to delve into those things a little deeper, I guess, if you will, trying to branch the academic side of it with the complete nerd side of it with the person that's sort of like, if you're able to deliver that nerd message in a way that doesn't sound like you're delivering the nerd message,
yes,
people will accept it more. You know what I mean? Like trying to figure out that balance. Because you'll listen to some people talk about things and with their information that they're saying is great, but the delivery doesn't keep you engaged, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So trying to balance that.
You need bridge people for sure.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Very cool.
I don't know. Where do you guys see going? Where do you guys see yourself going?
We've talked a lot. We've spent a lot of time talking about this, and I think we have some things that are relatively certain about. Like, as an example, I know that we have a very strong desire to incorporate both herp trips and symposium expo visits into what we do in some way.
100%.
That would entail in-person podcasts. Like, for example, if we were able to make Tinley, it's been challenging, partially because Roy and I are both in phases in life that keep us really, really busy, and we don't mean busy in a way that it's like, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm real busy. And they like go watch Game of Thrones for 6 hours. What I mean? It's like, I know, like, I won't speak for Roy, but I run two separate businesses, a reptile business and a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy. We have this podcast. I have a baby on the way, and we do work with a couple other companies on the side, like consulting stuff,
Right. Right.
It's a pretty goddamn full schedule. And if I want to keep a relationship with my wife and be able to see my son when he's here,
right,
can't even really envision adding a lot, you know?
Yeah.
But we have a desire to incorporate that stuff in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And when we get a little bit more breathing room, I think that's an absolute inevitability.
Mhm.
And, you know, we have some other stuff we're working on as well. But
Cool.
Roy, you want to say some more?
I mean, I feel like that pretty much says it. I don't know. I really would love to do more face-to-face stuff. You know, it's like I spend too much of my life on Zoom as it is. You know, I love this. I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for both of you and your time. You know, this is great to connect in this way. But like at the same time, I really wish we were sitting at a campfire together right now.
Yeah.
You know,
different about it. Yeah,
100%. It would just be better.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And so like I love that, you know, and I'm so I'd love to get more time like that and time out in places, you know. It's like that's like my a lot of the other work I do in the world is like usually with young people, but taking young people like out into the backcountry and just like unplugging and like making fires by friction and you know, sitting around the campfire and talking, you know, and hiking and looking for animals and tracking. And like, that is like my happy place. And if I could do that with folks that I've met from the herpetoculture world, I would be like so amped, you know, it'd be so fun to do that. So hopefully we can get to that point. You know, we've kind of joked about like Burning Man in the desert, you know, Lizard Man in the desert, you know, just like, all right, here's the location and like whoever can be there will be there. And we're just gonna like eat geeks together for a week or whatever. I would love to do some stuff like that. And again, like Phil said, it's just like, as it is, like I basically work freelance, and that just means that instead of having like one job, I have like 6 different jobs that I'm the boss. I'm my own boss for like these. Right. It's just, I work way too much of my life, and I need to figure out a way to like make it more sustainable to do other fun stuff that's extracurricular. And so we'll get there.
Yeah. You just sparked something in my mind. It's like we've been trying to capture, and sometimes I wonder if it should be captured, that conversation that happens that I was talking about at the end of the night of a herp trip.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes I purposely don't record it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want I think something changes when you know it's recording. Because a couple times I've done an experiment and where I've recorded it without them knowing.
Illegal.
With them knowing, right? And I just wanted to listen back to the difference, and there was definitely a difference.
Yeah.
You know? So I'm like, should I just keep that for us? Should that be just an us thing? Does everything have to be out there? I struggle with that. But then I wonder, like, so we try to take the ideas from that, but it's never the same, you know? So
there's an E.O. Wilson quote that it was in one of the books that I read a long time ago that I come back to all the time. And occasionally I'll repost the same picture of it as like the little opening to a book. And it says, in the end, we hope we never discover everything, you know? And I really feel like that's kind of what it is when you say that, like, I'm not going to record everything because some stuff it's not meant to be. It's not what it's for, you know. Right. It's for the people involved in that moment, you know. And
in that moment, it's like a special moment to those people, you know. And if you make it a public thing, does it change? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think I kind of even feel like that quote for me, it kind of like touches on this feeling of like those species that are in places that are just out of reach. That's like I'm never going to be able to keep that thing, you know. You know, it's like there's something like, for me, I'm like, I'm kind of glad, you know, like there's this badass Pilotes sulphureus in like southeastern Brazil. That everyone's always posting in the Pilotes group and stuff, and it's like we're never gonna get them. You know, it's like, nope, like that's out of reach forever. And there's something in me that's like, I mean, provided I would love to keep that snake, I'm like, I'm satisfied that we can't. In a way, it's kind of there's something poetic.
I have a thought with that. There's a little story. When we went to Australia, went to Scott and Ty's place. They have imbricata, and imbricata is like that for me. We're never going to have it. It's just never going to happen, right? I can hold the hope, but probably not my lifetime.
The pipe dream.
Yeah. But when I went to their house, they had a pair that they were keeping outside, and they couldn't get over my reaction was so intense that they were like, wow, maybe they are cool. Like they were like, we didn't think they were that cool, but like, man, you're super excited about these things. And it's just like, I was like, man, do you realize what this is? They're like, yeah, it's just a crap it, so but it's crazy.
Yeah.
I love that.
For sure.
Man.
It's like almost like a cryptozoological thing. It's like a Sasquatch or something,
Yeah.
Chupacabra, baby.
Yeah,
oh
it's the
chupa. It's Morelia imbricata. What the hell?
Yeah, exactly. I love that stuff.
Yep.
Man.
Cool. Yeah.
Good shit.
Well, I mean, where are you gonna go, Phil? Go for it.
I was just gonna say I don't know if I have anything else. I feel like that's a great way to cap the convo if we want to do that closer question. This has been and I say that like this has been an amazing conversation, Eric, and I'd love to hopefully we can keep this kind of open ended and do this again from time to time because this is great shit. This is amazing.
Yeah. I want to say before you say that, like, I really do really enjoy your guys' podcast. Probably it's one of those ones that are, and I can say everybody in the network says the same thing. Like they're all like, yeah, we all love that, Project Herpetoculture. Yeah, man. You guys, I think I think you guys think about things and you talk about those things. It's like I don't know. I just really dig what you guys do. It's just really,
thanks, man.
Really a great listen. So
it means a lot.
Helps me with my commute.
Hell yeah. Oh, really?
For sure.
It really does mean a lot.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
100%.
That's true. Yeah, man. That's thank you for telling us,
Yeah, much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Roy, do you wanna throw out the
sure.
closer?
The closer, yeah. So the closer is why herpetoculture? And why for you? Why do we do it? Why does it matter? However you want to interpret that question.
I think I have two answers. Why herpetoculture? First one is I'm just fascinated by how the world works. And I think that herpetoculture gives me that little insight into trying to figure that out. And I think the other part of it is the community of people that I would have never met, would never be associated with. We don't necessarily think the same, agree the same. I was telling my wife yesterday, we have people that, so I just turned 50. I know there's people in a group that are 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, and it's like, we would never be together and be tight friends if it wasn't for this. So that's really why her.
And it should be like that,
Yeah.
We should have big extended networks of a lot of different kinds of people.
There's so many views. There's so many different views, I mean, you got the older people that have been doing it for a long time and they have this perspective. And then you have newer people that are not, they're not conditioned to think this way. And they think outside the box. And when they're in an environment where it's comfortable for them to voice those thoughts, and sort of like, oh, okay, that's an idea. Let's run with that a little bit. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's dive into that a little more. And I don't know. That's where the good stuff is for me. So
yeah, absolutely. That's so cool. Yeah, man. It's so awesome that you have that perspective too. It's really nice. I love meeting people who have who recognize that the mind is like a parachute and it only works if it's open, and you gotta have a lot of different people around. That's such a beautiful thing. So hell yeah, you're the man, Eric.
I really appreciate you, man, and appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely.
We'll definitely have to do this again at some point. And I mean, I think that almost anyone that listens to the show is going to know exactly where to find you. But
Oh yeah.
regardless, where can they find you? Where can they listen to your show? All that kind of stuff. So
You can look us up, Morelia Python Radio. Just look that up. You'll find it. If you want to look at the other shows that are on the network, just put on NPR Network and yeah, you'll find them there. So
amazing.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to hit the button. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Oh yeah.